Welcome boys and girls, Christine here with a discussion about Grand Cathay in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. Now this is a topic I've talked about quite a few times. In fact, I made a video just 2 months ago on the subject. But with the Kislev rework is something worth revisiting because the Kislev rework has a system with supporters of the Orthodoxy and Ice Court that Cathay could really use in Warhammer 3 to make their campaigns more interesting. In fact, there are so many systems that Kislev got with their rework that would work quite well within the context of a Cathayan rework. Not just the supporter system, but you think of the Ataman system, which favors the idea of playing a more defensive playstyle, which would fit Grand Cathay very well with the Great Bastion aspect. Then you also have the ability for Kislev to negate climate penalties in multiple ways. So one is for Atamans, the other one is through a high level of control in a province, through devotion. Now, I don't necessarily think that's how Creative Assembly should approach Cathay, but it does present certain interesting ideas of what Creative Assembly could do going forward with Cathay. Now, I do expect a Cathayan DLC. I think a lot of people expect a Cathayan DLC. And if I were to guess where one of the Legendary Lords is going to be, or one of the provinces is going to be, it probably would be in this area of the campaign map. And that probably would be Monkey King or Fire Dragon. Then we also have this additional province over here in the Cathayan hinterlands that Creative Assembly has added. And then we have these ogres set up over here, the Stone Shatter Ogre Kingdoms. Now, it's interesting to think about the fact that Creative Assembly added another minor faction for ogres in Warhammer 3, especially due to the fact that, if you remember, almost a year ago, Legend of Total War was talking about how before Omens of Destruction was announced, he was talking about how the next DLC would be a Cathayan DLC, but it would also include ogre units, like a sub-faction of Cathay. Of course, that didn't necessarily end up working, though there's a whole discussion on that subject. I won't necessarily revisit it, but is very likely we're going to get the Monkey King, and if you're going to get the Monkey King, you're going to get the Fire Dragon. And of course, we can also consider the Slaanesh DLC. Now, I do fully expect Slaanesh to come alongside High Elves. The big question mark, I think, is which is going to be the third race that is going to be affected by that DLC. In the most sensical way, it would be Dark Elves, but one of the things Creative Assembly more or less said in their video is that they're going to have a free Legendary Lord. And based on the way they said it, it is going to be for Slaanesh. And might it be that the Slaanesh Legendary Lord would start in Cathay? I mean, you have the Cathayan hinterlands, which could act as a starting province for a Legendary Lord. Like, you have these 4 regions. It's a fairly solid province. Sure, jungle climate, not necessarily the best climate in the world, but if they were to add a new Slaanesh Legendary Lord, that is a position where they could add it in. Or something else, you know, maybe Monkey King, maybe they're building that slowly for the Monkey King, and there might be more terrain changes coming along the way for the Cathayan area. So just some perspectives on that, you know, be it supporters, harmony, climate situation, those would really benefit Cathay. And then, of course, you know, speculation on which is going to be the third race affected by the Slaanesh DLC. Well, we're probably going to find out which is the second, hopefully this week. But we don't really know, right? It might be this week, it might be later on. We have no clue how Creative Assembly is going to stagger that kind of information with regards to what they're doing going forward with DLC. So anyway, that is one aspect. Some of the things that they've done with Kislev, some of the things that they're looking to do with the next DLC. But let's talk about Cathay. So harmony, of course, is a big affair for Cathay. It's literally something that Creative Assembly and Games Workshop mention with regards to Cathay, right? But the way the harmony system has always worked for Cathay has never been that great. We used to have a top meter that would be affected by not just structures, but also things like research and things like lords and heroes. It was very annoying. The benefits were very significant, to be sure, and it was not so much of an issue of balancing harmony, it was keeping a balance, and it was annoying. It still is annoying, I should add, with regards to balancing harmony. The way they replaced that is they introduced this province system where if you have perfect harmony, you get campaign movement range, upkeep, and income. If you go fully in, you get some construction benefits, growth, construction time, control, but at the cost of recruitment downsides. And then if you go yang, you get recruitment benefits, but at the cost of various construction benefits. Now, the way the system works right now, there's not really much of a choice. Like, if you go fully in, you're sacrificing a lot of the recruitment potential of an entire province for a construction benefit. And it's also worth pointing out that going fully in or full yang is generally going to require a lot of different buildings to achieve that. And getting the smaller benefit is not necessarily so substantial when you consider the sheer amount of money you'll be able to both save and generate with perfect harmony. So it's very easy to get perfect harmony, though it's a bit annoying, sure, sometimes managing structures. Typically in my campaigns of Cathay, ever since they introduced the system, I've focused on perfect harmony, especially when they introduced the downsides, because initially there weren't, and then people cried out about it, and then they introduced downsides for not being in harmony, because they said, oh, it's too powerful to go fully yin or yang. Not quite, really. But anyway, the only thing I really use is I go a bit with yang if I just want to increase local recruitment capacity. That's roughly it, right? Because if I want to just recruit more units, it makes sense for me to, go down the path of a bit of yang. Maybe if I really want to develop a province and I don't care about it from a recruitment standpoint, but most of the time that's not really how it's going to work out. So it's not a great system, and that's why I'm very encouraged by what Creative Assembly has done for Kislev in their rework. So that's one thing. Research tree. The problem I have with the research tree, so it's a linear path more or less, but here's the thing. When you're playing Cathay, the benefits you get from Dragon Scales, and of course fletching mentors, and then Jade Stance, drill training, well, really Jade Stance, and then going all the way to Rite of Yang and Grace of Kuai Yin, are so significantly more powerful than the vast majority of other benefits you get in this research tree, except, of course, alchemic mortar, right? Because construction time -1 for provincial capitals is a pretty big deal. But outside of a couple of these benefits, a lot of this research tree ends up kind of feeling fluff. Sure, you do have some very powerful things over here in this research tree, undeniably so, but due to the pacing of campaigns in general in Warhammer 3 and the pacing of Cathayan campaigns specifically, you end up feeling it is pretty pointless. Because in general, Warhammer 3 campaigns are very early game focused, and Cathay especially so. So if you play any of the Cathayan campaigns, be it Miao Ying, Xiao Ming, Yan Bo, the meat of those campaigns is always going to be early on. Now, that's a general issue, but it's worsened for Cathay because of the climate limitation that they have. Because while Cathay doesn't suffer necessarily from the construction penalties or control penalties, they do suffer from the lack of casualty replenishment, which unpleasant climate does have. So that is one of the issues that they do have, like that focus on the early game because of the climate situation combined with the casualty replenishment situation. Like, it's one for Kislev to deal with bad climate, right? Because you at least have the ability as Kislev with Patriarchs of generating a huge amount of casualty replenishment. You don't have that same kind of benefit as Cathay. You don't have a casualty replenishment hero, and the only real way of improving casualty replenishment is to go with the Great Bastion, but that only goes up to 10%, and only if you basically keep the compass in that direction. I also have to say that Jan Bo's campaign is ridiculous from the perspective of like, yeah, he has all these compass directions he can unlock, but they take a long time, and the only one that's actually worth a shit is the Nangchang Basin. Like, everything else is pretty damn pointless in Jan Bo's compass. I mean, he can use the compass better than others, but yeah, it's still an issue in that kind of situation for his campaign. And, well, you literally end up just recruiting a bunch of Jade Warriors and Jade Warrior Crossbowmen, maybe some artillery, and dealing with the early game foes, and then you have nothing really to focus on in a campaign. It would help if they did have a way to deal with climate in a better way. It would help if they had a casualty replenishment hero. It would also help if we didn't have to spend a ton of money on the Great Bastion to fortify it, because it starts at tier 1, and you're going to get attacked from the Great Bastion. The Great Bastion is just a money sink, and it's not even really that great, honestly. Like, it's not really that impactful. I mean, you want to do it, to be sure, for various reasons, but the enemies here, for the most part, are just, you just farm them for XP. Like, due to the way the AI works for Warriors of Chaos, Chaos Dwarves can be a bit better, but there are ways to take advantage of that situation with respect to Chaos Dwarves. Like, you could, for instance, take the Dragon Crossroad, build a barracks there, make an alliance with Zaytan, have him defeat Village, and if he tries to attack you, well, chances are Grimgor is going to hit him in his backside. So, just worth pointing out in his campaign. So, that is one aspect that I do think that CA does need to improve. The Great Bastion. Like just Cathay, the Great Bastion system has never been particularly great. Previously, when the Realms of Chaos launched, it was the constant invasions and annoying invasions. Now those invasions are meaningless, so it's a fairly meaningless system. I understand what they were trying to achieve, it just never flat out fucking worked. Beyond that, we also got to talk about the unit roster of Cathay. So Cathay has a fairly good unit roster once you get to tier 3. But as I said, your campaign is going to be over pretty quickly, so a lot of the higher tier units end up feeling pretty meaningless. I do think having Celestial Dragon Crossbows as a tier 5 unit is a bit ridiculous. I think having Great Longmud Riders as a tier 5 unit is also ridiculous. The only unit over here that I think makes sense to have tier 5 is the Terracotta Sentinel, and to some extent the Skyjunk. I emphasize the aspect of to some extent. It's not a Thunder Barge, it's kind of like the equivalent. Like, I get it, it's a Flying Hellstorm rocket battery, but like, you look at Gyro Bombers for the Dwarves, I'd put it at the same tier. Like, I would say it's a tier 4 unit. But more than that, it's just like the fact that you have to build so much shit over here to balance harmony. Like, oh, you can't just construct one economic building, right? Because that's going to disrupt your harmony. You need to get 2 buildings in a province, in a settlement, in every settlement. And that ends up creating a good amount of annoyances when you're playing a Cathayan campaign in terms of how you're building up your settlements. Not really a great dynamic. I would also say that I think Jade Warriors in particular should have some form of limited upgrade system, like the Warband upgrade system. Because you look at Jade Warriors with crossbows, it's the same unit just picking up a crossbow. Or Jade Warriors with halberds, that's the same unit as Jade Warriors dropping the shield, picking up a halberd. Or Jade Warrior Crossbow and Shields, literally exact same unit as Jade Warrior Crossbows, but with that shield again. It isn't a great unit recruitment system overall, from my perspective. Like, oh, here's a variant of the previous tier unit, just requires a higher tier unit, and you can't upgrade the lower tier unit to this higher tier. I think that would be very much something I would like for Creative Assembly to address. Some of the things to address on that subject. They have improved the caravan system a bit, but it still feels like kind of a nothing system, really. Like, it's just like, you send a caravan, and you get money, and you might fight a bunch of pointless battles, or might be forced to fight a bunch of pointless battles. Like, Chaos Dwarves have a much better caravan system, because they actually have very few battles to fight, and when they do fight a battle, it's generally against a more interesting enemy, like, a couple of Ogre Bulls and some Noblars. That is what you're going to encounter in a lot of Cathay campaigns with respect to your caravans. In a lot of ways, Cathay does work as a race, right? Like, you have a good way of confederating other factions through just your diplomacy. You have a good, nice chunk of the campaign map over here to play around with. So all of those things do end up working pretty well. It's just that because of the casualty replenishment situation, you end up having to fight a lot of manual battles. And while obviously those kind of battles can be interesting early on, especially when you're dealing with Snitch and Lokier, it does end up falling off a cliff very quickly thereafter. Because if you can deal with Lokier and Snitch very quickly, then you're looking at sending a dozen stacks of troops westward or against Grimoire and just outright winning every battle. But then the auto-resolve kicks you. And like, seriously, you could probably auto-resolve your way through an entire Cathay campaign if not for the casualty replenishment situation. And if the only reason you're playing battles is because the casualty replenishment is not good enough and the auto-resolve is screwing you over, then that's not exactly a really fun race to play, is it? Then we can talk about campaign mechanics. Like, Yanbo, pretty solid campaign mechanics. His campaign is ruined by the fact that he has to deal with jungle. So jungle warfare in Warhammer 3 is generally speaking not great. He does have that extra climate, so technically he has the best campaign, but it is a tedious slog. Miao Ying and Xiao Ming don't have those unique mechanics. Like, you look at the Ogre Kingdoms and what Creative Assembly was able to do with them in their rework. They not only made a new campaign that was great in Maneater, they also made Scrag and Grease's campaigns much better and unique to one another. I mean, there's some issues here and there. I think they're, like, Omens of Destruction in general could use a balance pass in terms of, like, campaign balance. But, like, there's a night and day difference. Every Legendary Lord of the Ogres feels unique, feels very interesting, and I do believe that should apply to Cathay as well. Like, Miao Ying should have a different campaign focus than Xiao Ming. Maybe Xiao Ming could be focused on, alchemical nonsense, because that's kind of what he's doing. And Miao Ying should be focused on gunpowder and the Bastion, more so than others. So some unique mechanics from that perspective in those campaigns. And yeah, the whole astromancy focus on improving the compass system for Yanbo is pretty crap, I'm not gonna lie. Like, it just falls flat. That is an inherent issue with Shadows of Change, all the campaigns. Like, the unique campaign systems of Shadows of Change, or the objectives of those campaigns, are not really that great to begin with, even when they work well. And don't get me wrong, Matters of State as a mechanic works exceptionally well. It's just his campaign of we're gonna adventure in Lustria to build the compass. That's not necessarily what one would imagine with Yanbo. Like, he should really play more like Horror Franz, having to make interesting decisions, being stuck in the middle of the situation, being forced to make all kinds of decisions and having different dilemmas about Cathay. Instead, he's just stuck dealing with Mazdamundi in Lustria. And if your campaign is about dealing with Mazdamundi, then you know it's an awful campaign inherently, because Mazdamundi just flat out sucks as a Legendary Lord. And dealing with him is not exactly the pinnacle of Warhammer 3 gameplay, from my point of view. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's annoying to also deal with Village and Zaytan, to be sure, but at least it's a more interesting dynamic than, dealing with the pathetic Toad in Lustria. Calls himself Mazdamundi, but has nothing on the actual lore version of Mazdamundi. I don't know, maybe Slanesh, an addition of a Legendary Lord would make a significant difference in Cathay. What do I know about that? Like, people were clamoring for Arbol to be added in Cathay for a number of reasons, including lore reasons, actually. But I'm glad that they added Arbol where they did, because it certainly made campaigns in this area far more interesting. Especially if you're playing like Malachi and Kislev. Like, dealing with Arbol is a nightmare of a situation. He'll come at you with really powerful armies that are scary as hell to actually fight. You'll have to put up a fight. So I think that's good, but yeah. Cathay does absolutely need something, but it can't just be a situation of like, we're going to add another Legendary Lord so the early game will be more interesting. The problem isn't that the early game is the problem isn't the early game. It's what comes after the early game, what comes after those 20-30 turns of a campaign. And I do feel that's where Cathay is severely lacking. That's my perspective. Let me know what you guys think. Costin signing out.